Hi everybody, this is Jay again. I wanted to just come back again and give a little update on how I'm doing. When I first started doing the videos on my heart transplant, it was mainly because I had so many people who just didn't know what was happening. I literally found out on July 2nd that I needed a heart transplant. I signed papers, and then what happened was I um, was in surgery July 6th. So they actually found a heart within less than 4 days. So as you can imagine, I haven't really processed all of this yet. So the videos are a way of me processing this, and also to just let people know, because I started having people email me and saying, "What heart transplant? What's going on?" And I told my immediate family and a few close friends, but it's just a way of me letting people know what's going on with me. And then I was shocked and awed by the fact that I had like over 100 people respond and say, many of them said that, ever since we heard about this, we haven't stopped praying, and we wept when we saw your video. And I want to share this with my home group. So it just kind of blew up. I was a little bit overwhelmed by it at first, but then I realized something very basic is that if we can, weep and cry with our friends when they're in distress, we can also pray for our nation too, and we can see a third great awakening for our nation. I've said before, I'm going to call this series the Third Great Awakening because I felt as though I was born, then I was born again, and then now I've had a third great awakening. There were so many things that happened. I had heart surgery before, and that was a spiritual experience too, because when you realize that you are going to undergo a serious surgery, you get real serious about it. But this time I was literally told by a doctor, he said, "I can tell just by looking at you, you're in fourth stage heart failure. You have three choices. You can continue going on the way you are," which means I would check into hospice services, see if that's available for you. You can do what's called a ventricular assist device, which is a bridge to heart transplant, or you can get evaluated and have a heart transplant. So I did the evaluations. Um, the story behind it is very involved. I'm going to tell more about my hospital stories, but I wanted to just thank people again for praying. And I realized one very important, here's one of the lessons I learned in the hospital is that I have never really dealt with death very well. And I think that that's true of a lot of Americans. I was talking to one, I don't know if it was a nurse practitioner or a doctor or a physician's assistant, someone that was doing one of the tests on me. And I was under like local anesthesia, and we were talking about different things. And he said that Americans in general don't deal well with death. We want to hide it. We put people in hospice or in a nursing home, or we hide it away in hospitals. Throughout history and in most countries, people were born in their house, they died in their house, and people saw death as a natural fact of life, and it caused them to really try to come to grips with the spiritual reality of death. So what I want to do for the next few videos is talk about three very important friends of mine who died in recent years. One of them is Pat McEwen, who many of you know, Luther Late, who is my pastor, and Jeff Sigler, who I met when I was a very young Christian, and he had a great impact on my life. And every one of these people, they had a rough road. They did not have easy lives. They were not perfect people. Pat was probably perfect. So I want to talk a few minutes about Pat. And then my next two videos, I'm going to come back and I'm going to do tributes to people. This is my way of dealing with them. I wrote tributes to them on my website. One of the interesting things about Pat was that when she died, she had no immediate family. She had no kids. Or I guess she was divorced. No immediate family except for a church family here. But she chose to be buried in Africa because she was a missionary to the nations. She went to Australia, every continent in the world except Australia she'd been to. Israel, many countries in Africa, Australia, New Zealand, some countries in Asia, all throughout South America, and mainly with Life Coalition International. She was like the pro-life arm of Operation Rescue National, which was Keith Tusi's ministry. And Flip Benham then took over for Keith and did the national ministry. Pat McEwen, who very few people know about, did the international ministry. And she probably had more impact on the nations than anyone that I know. And yet she was just a very simple, humble person. So when I think of Pat McEwen, I think of the Great Commission. And I'll post some links under the video, and you're going to see pictures of her, and I'll do all the links to the article and so on. So she died on September 12th, 2019, and she'd been a friend of mine since 1993. During that time, 93 to 2000, I owned a house directly across the street from an abortion clinic, very infamous abortion clinic known as Aware Woman in Melbourne, Florida. And what happened there was this restrictive no free speech buffer zone. And during that time, the sidewalk counselors and evangelists couldn't cross the street to talk to the woman. So what the pro-lifers did was they bought the house across the street. I ended up living there, and I bought it like 18 months later. So I lived there for a few years. And during that time that I lived there, we saw the abortion rate in Brevard County cut in half. And this is during the time when the abortion rate in every other county in Florida that had an abortion clinic rose. And finally, the clinic closed in 2000. I'll put a picture up of them knocking the building down. And that wasn't due to us, by the way. That was because of they widened the highway, and the abortion clinic actually moved. They lost their lease there because of the activists. Then, not the activists, the Christians, excuse me, the evangelists. They lost their lease because Christians prayed and went out on the sidewalk. And then they lost their license, their lease again, and then they just moved out of town. So there's been no abortion clinic in Brevard County, Florida since the mid-2000s, okay? So the first time I met Pat was on the sidewalk in 1993. And she'd come down, she was a retired university professor, she was a horse enthusiast. She had, she wasn't rich, she had some money though. She had enough to retire and go into full-time ministry. So she wanted to come and minister to a woman on the sidewalk. And so when I first saw her, I said, this is kind of an unusual person. I want to find out what this person's doing. I heard that she was really good. So I wanted to know, like, why are you so effective in getting so many women to choose life? And she would just say, oh, I just do something crazy and we start talking. It's just like get their attention, get them off guard. And then as soon as they were engaged in conversation, more often than not, they chose life with the babies. So she was, I know a lot of effective sidewalk counselors. There's John Barrows, there was Judy Madsen, and so on, but Patty Smith. But Pat was probably, she was among them, if not the best. I've known some good ones. I'll say that she was the best, okay? So not only did she rescue babies and train other counselors, but she made sure the entire Melbourne pro-life street ministry was organized. There were always at least 2 counselors standing at the gates hotel every minute it was open for business. After she arrived, everything began to function. It was more unified, more organized. And so during that time, I was like a full-time Christian worker. I was a publisher, writer, video producer. And I spent a weekend in jail with Keith Tusey and other people with Operation Rescue National. I'd been involved with that in Brookline, Massachusetts as well, Massachusetts up in the late 80s. And I thought that after I got arrested the first time, I would never get arrested again. I thought, I'm just going to write about it, work for the Forerunner and so on. But soon after I moved to Florida, I started hearing about these arrests in Melbourne. They're going to shut off the street, and they're going to make free speech illegal and so on. So I was involved with Miss Pat and about 100 other people in these arrests for challenging the buffer zone law. We weren't actually blocking the clinic at that time. We were just standing on the sidewalk peacefully praying, and they arrested us. So it's like, they're going to arrest you if you're a Christian for standing on the sidewalk peacefully, but if you were pro-abortion, you could stand there with a pro-abortion sign. So we felt that that was, what did we call it? Ideologically based discrimination, something like that. So we actually, the Madsen case that came out of that went all the way to the Supreme Court, and we actually lost the case. But our testimonies in court were actually quoted by Justice Antonin Scalia. So he wrote the scathing dissent, and I actually got to see some of the things I said in the dissent. I was like John Doe number so-and-so, John Doe number, I forget the number exactly, but I'm actually in there, so that was kind of exciting. But because we challenged the buffer zone, we eventually encountered fair judges and realized that, hey, wait a minute, this is an injunction that's against Operation Rescue, Operation Goliath, Judy Madsen. but none of us were named in it, so they couldn't really apply it to us. And so then pretty soon the city of Melbourne, they stopped arresting Christians for peacefully gathering on a public sidewalk. And so the story exemplifies uh, this is the tireless attitude that Miss Pat had. She wouldn't give up until righteous judgment prevailed. And so I was really pleased to be with her in that. Now, I thought I would never get arrested again, but guess what happened? Another arrest. This was more recently in Winter Park, Florida, and this was like a major thing in my life for a while. Basically, what it was Jenna Tosh, whose brother-in-law is that guy Tosh 2.0, comedian. She was the CEO of Planned Parenthood in Greater Orlando. So that case took a lot of twists and turns. Basically, what we did was we came to her house, which is a 4-lane highway. We stood out on the sidewalk on the 4-lane highway, and we walked through the neighborhood with signs saying, um, you know, Christian signs, scriptural signs, and just exposing the fact that an abortionist lives here in your neighborhood. So the city of Winter Park decided they didn't like that much, and they made a law specifically applying to us. So that, I'm not going to get really into that case, but essentially that case got thrown out of court, and Jenna moved out of town. She's now in Los Angeles. Okay, so there's lots of really interesting things that came out of there. Like, for instance, we actually went and picketed Jenna Toss's church. Yes, she actually attended a church that's a Unitarian. It's a UCC church, which is very liberal. They ordain homosexuals and so on. Recently, we went there to just expose the church. This is not a godly church. They support abortionists. Recently, the pastor of that church was arrested for pedophilia, so he's going to be going to jail. So it's been an amazing bumpy ride for me, just because I know Miss Pat. So anyway, she continued for over 20 years after Operation Rescue, Operation Save America, helping Flip Benham and other people, these type A personalities. You know, she was out there helping them very tirelessly, very patient, understanding with these men who were, you know, I couldn't do it. I mean, I did that a couple of times for people, and I just said, you know, I'm going to go on my own and so on. But I'll mention a name here, Keith Tusi, who was my pastor. He founded Life Coalition International. He meant that to be the missionary outreach for Operation Rescue. And I was pleased in 1995 to help organize the first national pro-life conference in history of Russia with the help of Pat and with Keith and several other people. And we saw people from all over Russia come, 200 young people. Bob Weiner was the leader of the conference. And they had a solid day of pro-life training, and they had pro-life activist training. I don't call it activist, pro-life evangelistic training. And they also were able to take it back to their cities and so on. And so there were people that I met a few years later that were really impacted by that and had a heart for abortion. And as you might know, now Russia is very serious about enacting laws to protect life and things like that. I could get into that more, but I want to, it's a long, tough road. But the Soviet Union used to have one of the highest abortion rates in the world. And if you look at the date of that conference and the abortion rate in Russia, it's plummeted since then. And I'm not saying it's all due to us, but I think that we were there in God's time. Okay. So here's some of the countries that Pat went to besides Russia. She went to New Zealand, Australia, China, India, Europe, Israel, Central America, South America, and Africa. She was involved in helping refugee Christians from China find residency and jobs in several countries in South America. These were people that were fleeing China's one-child policy. So this is where men and women were sterilized against their will by the communist government. And then Representative Chris Smith took up their case. But during that time, the Clinton administration refused to work with LCI and other groups allowing them to immigrate to America. So Ms. Pat worked tirelessly, and she found them refuge in South America. And she would often go back to visit, find out how they were doing, and so on. When Personhood USA, that was led by Cal Zastro, Keith Mason, and later Dan Becker and other people, they began a Florida affiliate. Guess who was the first person to step up and be the sponsor? Ms. Pat. And she was the co-sponsor of a state constitutional amendment petition, and she was an executive board member. She later served as delegate to Personal Alliance. Now, she roped me into that, and so although she's gone, we're carrying on the work. Brian Longworth, um, several other people. I'll talk about other people later, but in addition to all that, she also served as a volunteer church administrator for a local church. So I couldn't believe this woman's energy. It was amazing. But the one thing that she was involved in that was her greatest love was the mission field. Even during, she contracted cancer. I forget the exact date, but it was about 3 years before she died. Even during her cancer treatments, she would make several mission trips a year, and she traveled to pro-life conferences all over the world. She would actually time her chemotherapy to be able to make room for her conferences in countries around the world. So that was her message: the personhood of all human beings, no exceptions, no compromise. And then she was at a conference in 2001. This is a quote from Miss Pat. She was talking to fellow Christian missionaries. She said, "Jesus chose ordinary working people. Peter was fishing. Matthew was collecting taxes, not a popular profession in any time. What made them so special? Because they were special because they were ordinary." And so this is something we have to keep in mind. God chose the foolish. He didn't choose the proud and the mighty. He chose people that are like childlike faith and so on. So she seemed very ordinary at first glance. I mean, you looked at her and you thought, like, this is just an ordinary woman. She's a nice lady, but when you get to know her, you realize how powerful she was. So she even had the opportunity to meet with government officials and so on down the line. She traveled with Doctors for Life, a missionary group that worked in the African bush with tribesmen that were in dire need of medical care. She also traveled to war-torn areas where the bombs were being actively shelled by artillery. She even contracted a number of diseases that can lead to blindness or even death. I mean, she came back from Africa with rare diseases, and she had to tell the doctors in the USA what she had, what kind of medicine to order. And these are medicines that are very easily gotten in the United States, but in Africa, they don't have them. So they had to actually go in the mission field, travel by bus through the bush, and deliver these to the people. And so we've eradicated a lot of these diseases in the West through modern medicine, but you go to these remote areas in Africa, and she was actually treating lepers, AIDS victims, but her group specialized in performing eye surgeries in areas that were difficult to teach. So after she went to Africa several times a year since 2009, she was very thankful that she still could go. She could still go while during her cancer trips. Okay, and so she compiled a number of these stories of tribal people that when they were healed of their eye diseases, they would burst into laughter or they would dance when they discovered their vision had been restored after surgery. And she told me that she even, for people that were beyond surgery, she even saw miraculous healings, like people who had white eyes and their eyes would just clear up and they would start seeing again, like actual what they call I'm forgetting the word for it. It's like they're miracles, like generative miracles, something like that. Okay, so this is another quote from Miss Pat. These areas are pretty remote, and people cannot just go to an optometrist in the city to get testing and glasses. I spotted a lady who is an albino in a queue. I asked Benario to bring her in for a pair of sunglasses because the African sun often blinds the albino. And so basically the idea is that they found a pair of lenses that were very thick, dark sunglasses. When we took away the original sunglasses, her face fell. But when I placed the new pair on her face, she burst into laughter so she could see. Our motto is so the blind could see, and it means both physical and spiritual sight. She, like most of our patients, listened intently to the gospel message and left with a tract in her native language, clutched tightly to her chest. There is no joy like seeing someone's eyes open to the gospel. So there's like so many more stories I could tell you about Miss Pat. I'll tell you one last one, which is probably the most powerful one that I've heard. She was working with training Christians in the Zulu territory in South Africa's East Coast to do sidewalk counseling. And after several days of training, they decided to name the ministry 11th Hour Counselors because there are no sidewalks in the area where the city was. It was so poor they had no sidewalks. So on the day that the group was about to put their training into action, they loaded up a school bus to go off to this abortion center in Zululand, and people were crowded into the bus, three to a seat, long hot journey through Africa and the Zulu territory. And then there's no more room on the bus. People are crying because they wanted to go, preach at the abortion clinic. They had to be left behind because there was no room on the bus. And so Pat left there. She called back several months later and find out, how's the 11th hour ministry going? And she was told, oh, we don't go to the abortion clinics anymore. And so after a moment, she kind of was shocked and disappointed. And then she was told that every abortion center in the Zulu territory had been shut down due to the ministry. So, I mean, this Zululand is not it's not a country, but it's like an ethnic region. So, I mean, this is the person who literally stopped abortion centers from operating in a nation. I mean, how many people do you know that can say they've done that? And she didn't brag about it. No one knows about it. So I'm here to tell you that she did that. So Jesus called his disciples not to just make converts, to make disciples of the nations, teaching them to obey all the counsel of the Word of God. The nations are the ethne, or the peoples groups of the world. They're not just geopolitical countries. There are people around you in your neighborhood with your own language, cultures, beliefs, and so on. So how many people can say that they've known a nation changer? Well, you can be a nation changer, and all you have to do is just have that humble heart, that childlike faith that Miss Pat has. So even though I'm grieved, I know I missed my friend. I'm happy when I think that she's wearing a crown. She's a glorified member of the church triumphant in heaven, and I hope to see you soon, Miss Pat.